The Chicago Bears claimed a pair of Minnesota Vikings players that have left Vikings fans scratching their heads as to why their team let them go in the first place.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we start with new wide receiver Ihmir Smith-Marsette and look at the potential that he brings to this Bears wide receiving core, how much he can contribute right away versus the development he still needs, and why Vikings fans were scratching their head a little bit about why the team let him go and why the team clearly wanted to get him back on the practice squad and felt a little bit thwarted by the Bears claiming him on waivers. Then we'll turn our attention to the defensive line and Armon Watts, a pass rushing defensive tackle that fits just what the Bears needed for some more depth on that defensive line. We'll find out why Minnesota didn't ultimately want to hold on to him and why it still felt like he could have been one of the better players on their D-line and how it could be a nice little find for the Bears up front there. And we'll wrap up kind of taking a look at and comparing the Bears and the Vikings a little bit with where the Vikings are making similar amount of turnover or similar a system of turnover with Kevin O'Connell, but not making nearly as much turnover with a new regime in their building and how that new offense may affect what we see from the Vikings, just what we can expect from that team that when you look at on paper on the schedule, it's a little bit tough to kind of parse out just how good the Bears opponents are going to be, those two divisional matchups. A lot of fun to get through with our guest today. We're joined by Arif Hasan from The Athletic. We have a good chemistry and a lot of fun ribbing back and forth, so don't take anything too serious except for the football analysis. Of course, that is always going to be business among us, but we like to poke some fun at each other and some of our mutual friends and colleagues around the Bears and Vikings sports media world. So let's jump right in. We are joined now by Arif Hasan, one of the hosts of Locked On Sports Minnesota here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and he covers the Minnesota Vikings over at The Athletic. Arif, thanks so much for joining us today. And I guess, first of all, let me tell you how glad I am to not have you on here right now to talk about Dakota Dozier. I'm just so glad he's on injured reserve. Like it makes this so much of an easier conversation.
When you say it like that, that sounds cruel. I'm so glad that dude's hurt. I hope he hurts more.
I'm not glad that he's hurt, but what would have been cruel is having to watch him this season. So
what did Kevin O'Connell say about Kellen Mond? It wouldn't be doing him a kindness to have him out there at QB2. Yeah, it would not have been doing us a kindness to see Dakota Dozier as the subject of a podcast.
Well, it doesn't feel like a kindness for Ihmir Smith-Marsette to go from the Vikings to the Chicago Bears. I saw your fellow Athletic colleague Nate Tice wasn't as distraught as I thought he would be, but I'm thinking behind the scenes in DMs, he may have been in tears. And I guess I want to start there. Why is a smart, handsome guy like Nate Tice so upset for losing a former, fifth round pick at wide receiver? What's sort of the hype there that Ihmir Smith-Marsette had in Minnesota?
I mean, we must know two different Nate Tices because the one I know is a dumb, ugly idiot. But, no, people who don't know Nate Tice is a very good friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, Ihmir Smith-Marsette was one of his guys, coming into the draft. He primarily did quarterbacks. We also did wide receivers in preparation for that draft, I believe at the time for Bleacher Report before he joined us at The Athletic. And it's one of those situations where it's not just that you like somebody's tools. I mean, there's a lot of fast receivers that do well on special teams, but that he seemed to begin to have an understanding of how to modulate his route running to make the most of his tools. And obviously he was still a raw prospect. He was drafted in like the 5th round. He's not a 1st round pick, right? But for a 5th round pick, Nate thought that there was, was he a 6th round pick? Did I screw that up?
No, I was just gonna say he's no Darnell Mooney, but he's still
right.
down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah. He's no Stephon Diggs, I think is how we're getting there.
Oh, that Bill on the Bills? Yeah, I don't know much about
yeah, sorry. He's no KJ Osborne. How about that?
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, so he began to develop kind of an understanding of route running and route running principles in a way that really excited Tice, while still not, losing kind of what made him, a remarkable athlete, right? Because, some athletes that, once they begin to learn route running, they don't have the ability to deploy their tools in a good way. Like I think Corey Coleman's a really good example of that, where, incredible athlete. And then as soon as you ask him to run a route, he's like very deliberate. And it's like, this guy ran a 4.3. It's the same thing, right? And that wasn't really the case for Smith-Marsette. So that was what excited him. I think in terms of like why the Vikings, well, I'm sure I'm getting ahead of your next question, but in terms of why the Vikings, in terms of why the Vikings, saw that and then decided, meh. I think really what happened there is that the Vikings conceive of their top 4 receivers on their depth chart as being like receivers, right? As being people that can contribute from the line of scrimmage, right? And then the 5th one is kind of reserved, and maybe they'll have a 6th one. That was part of a conversation the Vikings were having. Sounded like they wanted to have extra offensive linemen and defensive linemen. But the 5th one is a guy who is essentially there for special teams. Instead of 5th wide receiver, it's 1st ST or something like that, right? And this is based off of my understanding. They didn't like confirm this explicitly with me, but that seems to be the case. And a lot of teams operate like this. In fact, the Vikings before Kevin O'Connell operated like this. They had Dan Chisena on their roster, and that dude is not a football player, right? Like he had got a scholarship at Penn to be a track athlete, and then walked onto the football team. So he knows the rules of football, but like.
That's it.
Yeah, right.
Not much more than
that. Yeah. So my understanding was that was it, and so they had to decide between, Jalen Nailor and Ihmir Smith-Marsette for that role, and because ISM was such a liability as a special teamer, right? So he had 5 punt returns in the preseason. One of them was muffed, another one was a fumble, and then and the other 3, I think, one was for a pretty good game, something like 15 yards, and then the other 2 combined were negative, I think. Like it was just not great. It actually kind of reminded me of the 2019 Viking special teams unit. Very much that. But if that's the case, then Ihmir Smith-Marsette can only contribute as a receiver, and I thought that he had done enough, right, to do that. But then they made the trade for Jalen Reagor, who I anticipate is going to primarily be the punt returner, but they don't know that. They want him to win the competition before that they can give him the job. So right now, Jalen Nailor and Jalen Reagor are competing for the punt return job, and I anticipate that whoever wins the punt return job gets to keep their job as on the 53 man, and the other person is hopefully going to go to the practice squad. Now the Vikings have hoped that a number of people make it to the practice squad, and none of them have. Right, Sean Mannion signs with the Seattle Seahawks, which I think is the biggest L, right? Because you can't even get that guy. Then, but
I'm out.
Right, he made a choice, right?
Yeah.
First of all, and second, it's Sean Mannion, right?
Hey,
you can't.
You almost beat the Chicago Bears, Sean Mannion.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but like they wanted Kellen Mond to make the practice squad. Obviously, he was claimed on waivers. I was shocked that they thought he might clear waivers, right? The whole reason I projected 3 quarterbacks after they traded for Nick Mullins is because there's no way Kellen Mond would clear waivers, and he didn't. Armon Watts, which we'll talk about in a second, and then later, of course, Ihmir Smith-Marsette, right? I think they wanted all of those guys on the practice squad. So my guess is that between the two Jalen's, whoever wins the punt return squad, they were going to promote Ihmir Smith-Marsette to replace him. So that was, I think, the idea. But Smith-Marsette is just not a special teamer. He was like a multiple Big Ten special player team of the week, a person. I think he might have won Big Ten special player team of the year. Like clearly in college he had it, but that was as a kick returner. And the Vikings have a guy that almost made the Pro Bowl as a kick returner on 8 games of kick returns, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're fine. They're good at kick returner, right? And so they don't need him to do that, and he can't return punts. So yeah, what's he gonna? They haven't had him punt gunning, so who knows if he can do that. So that's my guess. I think they miscalculated. I think they made a bad move. I like ISM.
But in terms of offense, right? We've seen every year there's guys who shine in those preseason games and show all this potential and speed and tools, and then regular season, sometimes a lot of times it's opportunity, but still like it just doesn't. They don't become that guy. So like with ISM, how much? Obviously, like he'll have opportunity in Chicago, but how much of his skill set is or the appeal of him is potential versus a guy that legitimately could come in the regular season in Chicago where they don't have anything proven at wide receiver, and he could be
Right.
that early contributor.
So I think on a lot of teams, Ihmir Smith-Marsette would be like Robert Foster type for the Bills, right? Or Andre Roberts for Washington, right? Just a guy that like pops in every so often as the fourth receiver and tries to make a 50-yard gain, right? Uh, just like
Yeah.
yeah, just hey, run a 50-yard deep out, and if you're there, we'll throw it to you, and if not, I don't know, we're paying you like $500,000. Who cares?
Yeah.
So like as a fourth receiver who's supplemental that really can add an interesting dimension to an offense that at certain points of the game you can really use, right? And you kind of try to develop the rest of that skill set to see if you can kind of like turn into eventually like a Deshaun Jackson at the high end, right? um and maybe whatever people think John Ross is, that like that would be kind of maybe the median goal. But for the most part, yeah, like I think that he's primarily like a fourth receiver that if a player goes down, you don't think him as suddenly now he's the third receiver, but is good to have on a team, right? And before BC Johnson got hurt, BC Johnson would have been basically the receiver that you put in when you're missing a starter, and Ihmir Smith-Marsette would have been the receiver that you put in when you want to add some variety to the way that your offense is being run. And so that I think is how they view that. But then, BC Johnson goes down, and now they have to figure out kind of who might be an all-around receiver. They don't really have that. So for most teams, he would be the third or fourth receiver based on depending on whether or not they were a 2 or 3 receiver team. For Chicago, I think he starts. I mean, the receivers are garbage. So, and I like Darnell Mooney. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The rest
yeah,
some room for improvement there. Yeah.
yeah, he might be younger than Vale. There's no way he's not younger than Velus Jones, right?
He's 23 years old. He is younger than Bayless.
Yeah, okay, easy. But yeah, okay. I mean, like, I don't hate Byron Pringle or Equinemius St. Brown. I don't hate Dante Pettis, but like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, no, that's fair. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.net, the number one source for all of your football betting needs and sports information this upcoming season. You still have time to get in your last-minute bets for this upcoming year. You got the Bears win total set at over under 6.5. Line against the San Francisco 49ers is Bears plus 6, underdogs against San Fran. You can bet on their long shot odds to make the playoffs or where both the Bears or the Vikings are going to finish in this NFC North. BetOnline is going to have all your league developments, game matchups, news, and more. All of your sports wagering information is there, not just for football, but basketball futures, baseball season in the thick of things, hockey, soccer, tennis, boxing, all the combat sports, even esports and live betting as well. So head on over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends and action you need to know. Bet Online, where the game starts. But let's turn our attention to Armon Watts on the defensive line. I talked to Luke Brown from Locked On Vikings off the air.
I'm going to call him Luke Brown.
But that guy doesn't know anything. So that's why I wanted to have you on to talk. Yeah. How much of that with the Vikings moving on from Watts? Luke said there was maybe some financial consideration in that. I was also wondering just like scheme fit wise, going, being more that like true 3 technique type to go to the Donatel scheme. Was he not a great fit as a 5 tech rotational guy there? What happened with Watts?
I wish I knew the full story, honestly, because I thought that he had done well enough to earn is even too strong a word to be given the starting job. Like I think that the assumption was that he was the starter and nobody had done enough to push him from that, and they essentially traded him in a fourth for Ross Blacklock. Sorry, I wanted to say Angelo Blackson because I'm talking to the Bears, but Ross Blacklock, right? Is essentially what ended up happening, right? Obviously, the Texans did not receive Armon Watts, but that was the idea, and that gets them a worse player who has a year more of team control, basically, is what it does. Plus, you pay him less, right? Because Armon Watts had a bunch of playing time incentives that kicked in. So I don't think it was a very smart move, but I will say it's kind of one of those situations where you know that when a team drafts a player that is not a scheme fit, that team is better because they drafted that player, but that player is not better, right?
Yeah.
Because teams don't do what's best for players; they do what's best for teams. And and sometimes that means putting in a player in a situation where they're not in a position to succeed, or to maximize their potential, right? It's like taking like a really great deep threat receiver and putting him in intermediate offense with, like, I don't know, say Tua Tagovailoa throwing to them. Um, Undoubtedly, that this hypothetical team with a bunch of deep threat receivers are better for having acquired those deep threat receivers, right? But those deep threat receivers are not going to be maximizing their contract bonuses. They're not in a system engineered for them to do the best that they can do. But the team is better. I think that is kind of the situation with Armon Watts, except the team ended up making a decision that's probably better for Watts. This is not a good system for him. The idea of him playing as a rotational kind of four technique player is not great for him, and it does not maximize his abilities. I think he's a true three technique that incidentally played a lot of nose for the Vikings because of injury. That can be pretty decent at it. Can be kind of like, if he's starting, you're not upset, but if you've got areas to upgrade, that's not a bad area to be upgrading at. But
That's exactly what Luke said. He's like, if he's your starter, you feel like you could do better, but if he's one of your backups, then you're feeling pretty good about where you're at.
yeah, he's really great depth. He's better than a lot of backup three techniques.
So then, like, it's a little bit astounding for me when I glanced at this Vikings depth chart and I saw Jonathan Bullard, former
Oh,
Chicago Bears, is
dude.
on their made their 53, but Armon Watts didn't.
So first of all, I'll say Bullard killed it. Like,
Really?
he was I was shocked too. And the thing is, I don't think the Vikings expected any of this either. He was a late signing, relatively speaking. Like, they didn't sign him in like August, but he was a relatively late signing. And he started out at the bottom of their depth chart, like, genuinely, and he just kind of worked his way up.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I was shocked. And this was a guy that I was like, man, Bears drafted a good one. I really like Bullard back when they drafted like third round from Florida, I think.
Yeah.
And
13 or something, or 2015. It's been a while. He's been around the block quite a bit now.
yeah, I'm surprised he's still in the league, but like, good for him, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was like one of those guys where it's like, well, in an old school system, he'd be a 4-3 D end, but in kind of the newer systems, he's a 4-3 technique, right? And very often that means five technique.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's what he's doing here, and he seems to be excelling at that. I don't think he's better than Armon Watts, but the Vikings saved $1.5 million by making the moves that they did, and it seems like that's important to them. It very much sounded like cap considerations were in play here. So again, this was not the best system for Armon Watts, but I do think that he would have been a better fit there than Blacklock or Bullard from the perspective of making the team better. So yeah, it is a bizarre move. It's kind of one of the moves that I think Kwesi has made a bunch of good moves. The front office has made a bunch of good moves within kind of the range of goals that they have. But this is, to me, not one of them. I think that they made a mistake here,
Well,
honestly.
when you can save $1.5 million in late August, you got to do it. I mean, you need
Yeah.
that cap space right now to sign.
Yeah.
To
Who did they just grab? David Blau or something like that?
Yeah, I mean,
Good move.
big time moves there. I mean,
Yeah.
upgrading the
Great.
quarterback position. But with Watts specifically, right? You look at his career, came in as a rookie, had a couple of sacks in rotation a couple years ago, just a guy rotating in. And then last year they kind of, like you said, forced him into the starting lineup a little bit due to injuries. He had 5 sacks. I mean, do you feel like is that 5 sack type guy the level we should expect him in? Was that a peak, or is he still, you see him as like an ascending player? Where do you sort of see his, I guess, his trajectory right now?
I would say these two things. One, that 5 sacks is not representative of the talent level that he demonstrated. Two, he could still be a quote unquote 5-sack guy. He still has untapped potential to hit that I think he's got the capability to hit that will allow him to kind of have a season where he earns all 5 of those sacks, if that makes sense. Fundamentally, I think that he is a solid player to have in your roster. Like I said, the Vikings ended up, especially last year, generating a ton of sacks for players who did not demonstrate the talent to have as many sacks as they did, right? Like DJ Wanham is an incredible example of that. And, he's still kicking around here, I guess. But, to some extent, some of the other players that generated a couple of sacks are a good example of that too. Armon Watts is kind of one of them, right? But the thing is, he's been miscast with the Vikings, not because the Vikings didn't know how to use him, but again, because of injury. They moved him to nose tackle because I think at the combine he weighed 300 pounds, like on the dot, and that doesn't scream nose tackle to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But he had the best nose tackle ability after Michael Pierce opted out, and they didn't have Dalvin Tomlinson 2 years ago, right? And so right, like what do you do? Like
Well, he's here. Use him.
yeah, right. It's like there's no way we're getting Shamar Stephen again. That was a disaster, right?
Yeah.
So they played him at nose tackle. He was not great against the run, which is like the job. But that was against double teams, right? What's interesting about him, I think, is that when you watch him play, he plays the 3 technique position in the rare instances he's been able to play it, kind of like he's a 4-3 defensive end. And by that I mean he attacks edges a lot. So he does like spin, and he's a longer guy, so I think that actually is a style that makes sense for him. But he attacks edges a lot. He does spin moves if he sees enough space, and he tries to create that space by attacking the outside edge before going onto the inside. He knows that he's got long arms, and he tries to use them appropriately and efficiently. Just not to say he's afraid of contact, which I think, if you're describing a bunch of 3 techniques that way, a lot of them are going to end up being the kind of guys that don't really love contact. But he does get washed down when he gets double teamed, which is like again, he was a nose tackle. What are you doing?
Yeah.
But as a 3 technique, he's okay against the run. He didn't do a great job in camp against the run, which, given the way that Fangio Staley style defenses need their interior to do, like,
Yeah.
we don't have enough linebackers to stop the run. It's up to you at the front to do it. So I can see why that would be like and our linebackers are 200 pounds. So I can see why that can be like an overriding concern in that system over other systems. But he was doing fine as a pass rusher and collapsing the pocket and stuff like that. He wasn't lighting the world on fire from that perspective, but I think he was about average as a starter in that respect.
Both ISM and Watts, both holdovers were holdovers, I guess, from the previous Vikings regime. It's a trend that we've seen a lot now in Chicago with Ryan Poles, just kind of taking Ryan Pace guys and getting them as far away as they can from this organization. How much are you seeing that in Minnesota? I mean, obviously they can't turn over everything all in one offseason, and a lot of the main core pieces are still there. But I guess how much of a propensity has there been to get Quessie's guys in as opposed to getting Spielman's guys out of there?
I think besides those 2, not really a ton of it. Because like you take a look at somebody like Kellen Mond, and I saw was it Joel Corey, I think, say, part of this is just because it's a new regime and they don't have any attachment. Kellen Mond's not their pick. And Matthew Collar was arguing with him on Twitter, as callers want to do. and
Yeah.
and he was like, no, Kellen Mond just sucks. And Joe Corey was like, yeah, but he sucks either way. But like, the other staff would have given him in a year. And Collar was like, have you heard Zimmer talk about this guy? No, they wouldn't have. And I think in this case, Collar's right. I think getting rid of Chaz Surratt, getting rid of Kellen Mond, getting rid of some of these guys, Janarius Robinson, it was just a talent issue, a skill issue, right? So that was it. I don't think there's a lot of overhaul where they're just like, yeah, you're a system fit in the previous regime, not in this one. I think that's more an Armon Watts, example. But like Anthony Barr would have been gone either way, right? Because it's the nature of his injuries in the contract situation, which he's in Dallas now, right? What a perfect backup to Micah Parsons. I can't think of a better situation. And I don't know who else they really got, like, quote unquote got rid of, right? Like Xavier Woods walked away in free agency, but he wouldn't have been re-signed because Cameron Bynum was too good. And then of course they drafted the safety. And a lot of the turnover was kind of natural and would have happened in either circumstance.
Mhm.
Plus on offense, the offense is different, but the bones, the foundation is the same, right? And so there's
That
not
was actually going to be my next question. It's like you go from Gary Kubiak to Clint Kubiak to O'Connell, where it's like O'Connell, if you go loosely up the tree, you start getting back to Kubiak. So like I was going to ask, like, yeah, it's like I was going to ask, like, how would you expect, like, like obviously in Chicago, it's like, oh, new scheme, everything's going to be better and improved. But in Minnesota, like, it's how different is it going to be? And is that projected to be like, oh, the offense is going to be better as a result of O'Connell and the new scheme?
Yeah, so I'm writing a little bit of a piece about this, and the analogy I kind of hit on. You could tell me, like, give me live feedback on if this analogy makes sense. Um, the foundations of the house are strong, but you can still design a house in a bunch of different ways that can either be really effective and beautiful and functional, or really ugly and frustrating and non-functional. Right? The foundations are strong in either instance, but the house that you build around it is different, right? And so all of the materials that they're working with, right, are compatible with one foundation or the other, right? You've got Kirk Cousins, who's a drop back, or not a drop back, a play action style quarterback that can drop back, can do quick strike stuff, but very much likes to work play action off of wide zone. Very much likes to do kind of the rolling out of the pocket and hitting kind of your sail routes and stuff at the same side of the field. A relatively quick processor, very good pre-diagnosis or pre-snap diagnosis quarterback. You've got receivers that run, the route tree. They can adjust the route depths based off the quarterback's footwork. This is all stuff that you need in both offenses, right? But kind of how you deploy those skill sets, whether it is like a 3 wide receiver system that throws the ball a lot, or it's a 2 tight end system that runs the ball a little bit more. How you deploy that offense within those skill sets differs really greatly, right? And I think that that allows the Vikings to maintain a lot of continuity on offensive personnel while making the offense potentially, I don't know, games haven't started yet,
Sure.
potentially much more effective. I was going to say modern, but we've seen 3 receiver offenses for a while now. Modern is maybe giving them too much credit. Really, it's not old fashioned, I guess is the best way to put it.
Contemporary. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so it's like with the change, but not the complete change, but just the sort of change that the whole
Yeah.
Vikings team has been this offseason. Like they're left on the schedule for me for the Bears is like a team that I can't tell like whether to expect them. Like I don't expect them to be like drastically worse, but I don't know that I expect them to be like drastically better than they were last season. I don't know. Where do you start to set expectations for Vikings games? Because they're always weird and they always perform. You just can never know what you're going to get or what exactly to expect from a Minnesota team any given year.
Buddy, I hate covering this team. It's impossible, man. Yeah, okay, so my expectation is that the offense will get better, right? But the defense is one where I have no clue, right? Because I first of all, I really like the Harrison Phillips signing. Holy crap, especially after seeing him in camp and especially against joint practices against the 49ers. Really incredible stuff that I think we've seen from Harrison Phillips. So there's some elements that I really like. I thought the Za'Darius Smith signing was really good in the last week and a half, 2 weeks of camp. He really blew up, especially against like Trent Williams. Good player to showcase your skills against.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, beating a
Wow.
Hall of Famer.
You can
Must
do
be
it
doing
there.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, who's he going up against? Like, what 5th round pick is going to be starting at the left tackle for the Bears?
Braxton Jones.
There it is. There it
The
is. Braxton Jones. The Braxton Jones.
Yeah.
From the Braxton State University. Yeah. Yeah, I think he'll be fine against Braxton Jones.
Hey, Braxton Jones has been holding Robert Quinn at bay in training camp. He's
Great.
He's the riser of camp. I'm not going to go on here and say
right.
okay, left tackle.
Braxton Jones apologia tour.
No, they signed Riley Reif with the intention of him beating out Braxton Jones, and Braxton Jones said, "No, this is my job."
You shall not pass.
If Riley Reif is the bar here, that's about where you can.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, honestly, that's fair. That's good. Yeah. So, I like a lot of the individual moves, but like the thing that I think a lot of Vikings fans underrate is how friggin' good Mike Zimmer is at defense. Just
Mhm.
astronomically good. And I don't think that the lackluster defensive performance of the last 2 years are a product of poor design from Mike Zimmer's part. In fact, the Vikings continue to be under Mike Zimmer an elite red zone defense and an elite third down defense. Like it's one of those things where you talk to some of these nerd statisticians like Eric Eager and Lopez and all them out there, and you talk about like third down conversion rates, and they're just like, whatever. It doesn't third down doesn't matter. I don't know if your audience can see me, but I did the jerk off hand emotion, so now the listeners can know. Like third down defense does not translate year to year. It's very volatile. That it has an outsized impact on performance, but it's not sticky, right? I think is the phrase they use, except in the case of Mike Zimmer, and they will say that explicitly, right? And his third down defenses from like 2016, at least 2015, maybe, but at least 2016. Sorry, I screwed up but 2015, at least 2016, have been in the top 3, if not the top 1, and in 2017 it was the top third down defense of all time. Yeah, it's just incredible stuff, right?
Wow.
And his third down defense last year was good. It's just the rest of the stuff wasn't great, and that's a personnel thing.
There's two or three other downs that you got to deal with sometimes.
It turns out.
Weird.
And to me, that's likely a personnel issue. But but Vikings fans are not used to people converting like third downs all that often against them, which is why it's so frustrating. Like when they watch Aaron Rodgers do it against them, right? Which they still split the series, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, but that's going to go away, man. You don't like Ed Donatel. I'm sure is great, but like this is the best third down defense guy of all time. And you're just going to regress there. Now, if you improve on first and second down, maybe that's a net positive, maybe not. You're probably going to improve in the final 2 minutes of the first half, which the Vikings, boy, I don't know if you've seen the charts. I put together some charts like a couple months ago. And if you go like all the way back to recorded history for points given up in the final 2 minutes of the first half, it's not that the Vikings have given up the most. It's that they've given up the most by a greater margin than the distance between like second and 700th.
Oh my God.
like it was like it was bad. like it's not just like historically bad, but like deeply satanically bad.
They couldn't get into third downs apparently in those situations.
Yeah, right. They were just scoring on first down, like the final two, like every team went like Super Saiyan in the final 2 minutes of the first half.
I think that was like the only time the Bears got points on them in those games. It felt like it was like, we can do it. Here we go.
Yeah, they killed it. But yeah, so you might be probably going to improve there because how could you not? Like historically speaking, right? Like they could field 10 players in the final 2 minutes of the first half this year and do better, right? So that's how I feel about that. So they're going to improve there and they're going to give up fewer points. But if you look at it from like an expected points perspective, the Vikings were like 10th or 12th on defense. It was just that portion of time. If the Vikings, if all games were like 56 minutes long, and this is not like an excuse to say the Vikings were secretly good, but rather a demonstration of how good that defense was historically or normally, the Vikings might have been a 13-win team in a 56-minute game situation. So that defense was really good, except then, and except occasionally on first and second down. And I don't know that you'll be able to replicate that, but they might allow fewer points because of the weirdness of those specifics. So I don't know what to do with this team because the defense is different. Donatel did not do a spectacular job in Denver. In fact, he wasn't even in charge, right? But the personnel might be a little bit better, and regression is probably going to be in their favor. So I just don't know. I think the offense is going to be better, and I think that might add a win or two, but the defense is just this wide band of potential outcomes because they'll get worse on third down. They'll get better in high leverage situations just by chance, and all of that middle stuff I don't know what to do with.
So that was a long way of saying I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, glad I had you on so you could tell us you don't know. Really appreciate you.
Well, I mean, you bought into this.
No, but in all seriousness, Arif is one of the best Minnesota Vikings noun reporter, analyst, media personality, content creator.
Fake news dispenser. One of the best Vikings fake news dispensers.
one of the best. I couldn't even say one of the best Twitter followers out there either. It's mostly just him talking crap to Luke and the other Vikings guys. So he's a guy that's worth listening to on this podcast. So Arif, I really appreciate you coming out of this. Let everybody know not only what you're doing with the Athletic and Locked On Sports Minnesota, but where they can find all your work.
Yeah. So with the Locked On Podcast Network, I'm doing the Minnesota Football Party. That's me, Luke Braun, Luke Inman, and Sam Ekstrom, who also have their own Locked On Podcast properties that they do independently of that. It's a really great intermingling of things. Then also me. Uh, that one's fun. That one's a ton of fun. We get up to all kinds of shenanigans. I don't like any of my co-hosts, and I make that clear to them at every moment of the show. So I want people to tune in and listen to that. And then also I'm over at The Athletic. I publish stuff about the Vikings all the time there and occasionally national level pieces. And you can find me at theathletic.com/author/Arif Hasan. And other than that, yeah, I've got a podcast, Norse Code. I invite you on twice a year to make fun of you. I didn't know you had the beard because we don't have video when we do your guest spots. Specifically you, because I don't want to look at you. And I kept on making 16-year-old jokes because you look like a 16-year-old when you're clean shaven. I didn't realize that now you look like a Mormon elder, right? Like we did totally different vibe.
It's because you didn't come to Mobile this year. That's what you missed out on.
That's it. Yeah, I was sorry. I was in Vegas. I'll do better next time.
We could have gone bar to bar to tell everyone about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, but unfortunately,
yeah, have you heard the good word, the sequel? Yeah, that would have been us. But yeah, you can find me at Norse Code, where me and James make fun of the guests that we bring on and occasionally ask them about football. And yeah, otherwise follow me on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. You will not get what you want out of that follow, but a bunch of other people do it, so I suggest you do it as well.
A ringing endorsement there, Arif. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to Arif Hasan from The Athletic and Locked On Sports Minnesota for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation, and I sincerely hope you do, it's always a lot of fun, make sure you hit that subscribe button on wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We'll have more guests on like that throughout this upcoming season, so plenty to keep coming back for. Still want to deep dive into Alex Leatherwood a little bit more, one of the other newcomers on this Bears offensive line. And before you know it, we'll be looking ahead to the San Francisco 49ers Week 1 and regular season Bears football. So appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate you following along throughout this episode. Have a great weekend. And most importantly, come on back for Monday for another opportunity to bear down.